Today we're taking green bean casserole to a whole new level. Forget the canned soup and those crispy onions in a can. This is all homemade and totally fresh. We're making a creamy mushroom sauce from scratch and topping it off with crispy golden shallots that blow the canned stuff out of the water. Whether it's for a holiday meal or just because you want a cozier dinner, this green bean casserole will make you wonder why you ever did it the other way. For the full ingredient list, check the description box below, but enough talking, let's get cooking. So the first thing we gotta do is prep our vegetables. We're gonna start off with our green beans. So I have these green beans that I hand-picked out of the big bin at the supermarket. I made sure that I picked the green beans that are good. Green bean picking is one of the things that you still gotta do by hand. Even when you get the big bags of green beans, I find that some are gonna be a little shorter or some are a little rotten. If you take the time and pick them one by one, you're gonna get a really good batch. So these are already washed, but I do have to trim them. So let me show you how I like to trim them for this recipe. So green beans have two ends. We got the end that the stem was on and the other end. We're gonna trim off a little bit of both. So I'm gonna take off as little as possible. This end tends to be a little rough and I like to do it on the other end just because it makes them all look the same. Sometimes it gets a little fibrous. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna cut off the ends and then we're gonna take the green bean and we're gonna cut it in half into these like 2-inch pieces. How I like to do this is I like to have my casserole dish right next to me, and as I'm trimming the green beans and I'll cut the ends off and then cut them in half, I'll throw them right in my casserole dish. I usually get a little bit more than I need. So when I fill the casserole dish up, I know I have enough green beans. It's not gonna be too much or not enough. If you hand pick the green beans, like I told you about before, most of them are gonna be of similar length. So you could start to rock and roll 2 at a time just by taking down 2, and that'll cut your time down basically in half. If you're getting fancy, maybe you can do 3. And this is really helpful if they're all of similar length. Some of my earliest cooking memories are when my mom would sit me in front of the TV with a TV tray and some string beans, and I would have to trim the string beans. So doing this is very reminiscent of my childhood and just helping my mom out in the kitchen, even though I was watching G.I. Joe or He-Man or whatever I was watching, and I would trim the string beans. Once you get a little confident, you can do a bunch at the same time. And again, if the string beans are of similar length, it makes it a whole lot easier. That was like 5 at a time. So you'll notice while I'm trimming these string beans, I already got a big pot of water going on the stove. It takes a long time to boil a big pot of water, and we're gonna blanch these string beans. So while you're doing this, and this takes a little bit of time to trim the string beans and to cut them in half, get your water boiling so you don't have to wait. And the reason you wanna chop them in half is this is gonna be a casserole dish that you're gonna spoon. So you don't want giant string beans like this in the spoon. When the string beans are cut smaller, it'll eat and scoop a whole lot better. You know, this isn't a dish that you want to take your knife out for. And even though holiday meals can be very difficult at times to make and super stressful for a lot of people, you know, doing it like this where you're really taking your time to make sure that you're putting a lot of love into your food, I mean, that's what really makes the dish great. Green bean casserole, maybe it's something you eat for dinner, but for me, this is something I only see around Thanksgiving time, Christmas time. These are special times, so if they are special times, we're gonna make them special times by making special food. And as I'm getting down to the end, it looks like I'm gonna have exactly enough string beans for this whole dish. So I actually didn't buy extra. I bought the exact amount that I needed. Remember, especially when cooking a holiday meal, it's always better to have a little too much of something than not enough. The last thing you want to do is run to the supermarket on a Thanksgiving morning or Christmas morning. Those are the worst times to go. And most of the time, nobody's there, but there's also no ingredients. Look at that, the perfect amount of string beans right inside the casserole dish. So inside the dish is gonna be the green beans plus the mushroom cream sauce. So you want just like a little bit of room, and definitely room for the crispy shallots that we're gonna put on top. But this is the perfect amount of string beans, and how many string beans you're gonna use is based upon the casserole dish that you're using. This is probably like an 8 by 12 or maybe like a 7 by 12, just an odd shape, but I find that this is a perfect amount where it's not too much and it's also not too little. The next thing we're gonna prep is gonna be our mushrooms. So here I got some baby portobellos. You can use cremini mushrooms, you can use shiitakes, you can use whatever fresh mushroom that you'd like to use, but how we're gonna prepare them is we're just gonna thinly slice them. So we're not using cream of mushroom soup. We're gonna make our own. You don't need to do anything exact. And mushrooms are a great vegetable to like work on like your chopping skills because they cut so easy. You don't really need a super sharp knife, and we don't need to be super exact. So let's plow through these We're cutting down our mushrooms into, maybe 1/8 of an inch slices. And traditionally this recipe uses the canned mushroom soup from Campbell's and also the fried French's onions right out of the can. And I understand the whole energy behind that it's quick and it's fast and it's something easy to throw together. I really like my food, and I think Thanksgiving is such a food-centric holiday that I wanna make it really special. So I'm gonna make everything from scratch. And once you taste how much different the from scratch version tastes, you'll never, ever make the out of the can version ever again. Next up, we are going to dice an onion and mince up some garlic. This onion is rather large, so I'm just gonna put 1/2 of it in there. If your onion's a little smaller, you may wanna do the whole thing. So the last thing we're gonna prepare is gonna be our shallots. And how we're gonna use the shallots is we're gonna use them as a replacement for the crispy onions on top. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna thinly slice these shallots using a mandolin, and then we're going to coat them with flour. We're gonna fry them, and we're gonna make our own elevated, homemade, crispy onions. These are unbelievable and way better than anything that you can get in a can in the junk food aisle. How many shallots we're gonna use is gonna be enough to cover the top of the dish. A shallot can be really big and they can also be really little, so I don't really know how many, but we're just going to use our mandolin to slice them really quickly, and then we're going to figure out how many we need. So before we use the mandolin, let's clean up some of these shallots. We're just going to cut the top and the bottom off, and then what I like to do is just score along the outside just so we can take off the first layer of skin. Sometimes shallots have like a double shallot like on the inside, like here. That was perfect. It's split right in half. So here's one side, here's the other side. It's kind of like how they grow. And all you want to make sure is that you take off any of the root that's attached and any of the outside that's still like skin and not like usable flesh. And of all the onions, I think shallots are the ones that probably make me tear up the absolute worst. Let me know in the comment section if you think shallots are the absolute tear bomb, or one of the other onions gets you a little worse. Now, one of the most common injuries in the kitchen is the day that people get one of these and they get a little cocky and move too fast, and then all of a sudden you're missing the tip of your finger and you got to pick it out of your shallots. When I'm using the mandolin, I'm always using a cut glove. It makes moving fast way more safe, because the whole purpose of the mandolin is that you can cut time, but nothing will slow you down like a trip to the emergency room. So get yourself a cut glove. These are really inexpensive and they just make using this so much safer. So it usually takes a slice or two to figure out how much thickness you want to get out of the mandolin. This thing is really adjustable. Let's do a couple of slices and see what this looks like. Make it just a little thinner. The cut gloves gives me the confidence that I can move really fast and I'm not going to cut myself. And the mandolin is one of those tools that in the kitchen, it's almost unreplaceable. Like, could you do this by hand? Sure. But it'll take forever and you'll never get the same precision. And once you get the cut glove too, I mean, you can move pretty fast and the danger of cutting yourself is almost zero. So and I think this is about enough. So all these other shallots that I cleaned up, I'm just gonna store in the fridge. Oh man, my eyes. Ooh. It's hard for me to talk right now standing over this pile of cut shallots, but I think that this is enough shallots. All the other ones that I cleaned up but haven't sliced, I'm just gonna store in the fridge and I'm just gonna use them throughout the week for other things. Shallots are so multi-purpose, I can put them in anything. And while I'm putting them in the bowl, I'm just gonna break them up with my hands so they get nice and stringy. I wanna take all the big pieces that look like this and break them up into little individual pieces and fibers. We want these to fry up into nice little crispy onion strings or shallot strings. The big ones, they won't fry up really nicely or get really crispy. So just take a second to just break them all up. And if you want to get kids involved, this is a great introduction to cooking, because not only will they get the experience of having their eyes tear up, they'll get to do something that contributed to the holiday meal. Whew, get me out of there. And for this recipe, you can use dried thyme, but I still got the fresh stuff in the garden. We had such a warm October this year. The fresh stuff is still around. So we're just gonna pull the leaves off of this fresh thyme and just give it a fine chop. And this is gonna be the last thing we're gonna prep before we head over to the stove. So all of our vegetables are prepped, so now we can head over to the stove. And I like showing a lot of the prep for the vegetables in my video, especially for a holiday recipe like this, because there's a lot of people who don't cook all the time, but they are gonna cook for Thanksgiving, and 98% of cooking is the prep. So I wanna show that stuff because if it's helpful to help you cook, I wanna show it. So let me know in the comment section if you like all the prep that I showed in this video. So now that the prep's done, let's head over to the stove and we're gonna blanch our string beans. So the first step we gotta do is blanch our string beans. I got this big pot of water boiling, and the reason I got a lot of water in here is when I throw the string beans in, I don't want the water to cool down so much. So the more hot water's in here, the easier it's gonna be for these string beans to get blanched without the pot cooling down too much. So to do big pot blanching, once you get your water boiled, we're gonna put a lot of salt in there because we want the string beans to get seasoned by the salty water. So we're gonna take a tablespoon of salt and throw that in there. It's gonna dissolve instantly as long as the water's boiling. And now we're gonna put in our string beans for about 3 minutes. That should be plenty of time to get these nice, vibrant green and still pretty crispy. So these are gonna blanch pretty quickly. So I already have my bowl with ice water. So I got tons of ice in here and water and enough room for the string beans because I wanna take the blanched string beans and immediately go right into the cold water to stop them from cooking any further before they get mushy. So much of cooking is having stuff ready because once these string beans are done blanching, I don't wanna have to run to go get my bowl of water with the ice. This gotta be ready before you even throw the string beans into the boiling water. If you notice that when you throw your string beans into your pot of boiling water, it takes a while for the water to start boiling again, give it a little bit more time. This could take up to 5 minutes, but I don't think it's gonna take anything longer than 5 minutes if they were boiling when you put the string beans in there. So these string beans have been in there for about 4 minutes. I'll take one really quick just to test it. Should still be crispy, yet cooked. You probably need another 30 seconds. That was just a little crispy, so you can't repeat this step. Make sure that it gets done the right way. We're gonna give this just another 30 seconds and then we're gonna pull these out. And you can see that they were a little pale when they came in there, but now they are nice, bright green, and they're not overcooked. String beans, when they get overcooked, they tend to turn a little brown and a little like brownish green. These are nice, green, and vibrant. And when I plunge these into the water, that's gonna make sure it maintains that color. So that was about an extra 30 seconds or so. If you like your string beans a little mushier, maybe you get your stuff out of the can. You might wanna do it for like 10 minutes, but I think this is enough. Big scoop at a time. We're gonna put these inside the ice water and stop them from cooking. The spider really helps do this in as little scoops as possible. You can see how much I can get in there, and the water completely leaves the second I give it a scoop. So I'm gonna let these string beans sit in the cold water for about 5 minutes before I pull them out and put them in a colander so they can drain and get dry. Let's get rid of this big pot of water and let's head on to making our mushroom cream. I got this high rim saute pan heated up over like a medium-ish heat. I'm gonna throw a little olive oil in there and some butter. The butter's gonna give this really nice flavor, and the olive oil is gonna help this butter from browning too much. So once I get this butter melted, in go the onions, and we're gonna saute these until they get a little translucent. And I don't have to caramelize these onions, so we don't want too much color on them. We just want them to soften up and get nice and clear and release their juices. This is just gonna take just a couple of minutes. Periodically, I'll move them around the pan to make sure they got nice contact and that they're cooking pretty evenly. And right now I'm over a medium heat. If they're starting to burn or you're starting to see the edges of them getting singed too much, turn down your heat. Once these are nice and clear and just taking on the tiniest little bit of color, we're gonna add in our garlic. And we're just gonna cook this for a few minutes until it gets fragrant. Once you smell that wonderful smell of cooked onions and cooked garlic, that is the signal to put in your mushrooms. We're gonna dump our mushrooms in there and we're gonna saute these until they get nice and cooked and they release their wonderful juices into this mixture. Once the mushrooms have started to wilt a little bit, we're gonna take that fresh thyme that we cut up and now we're gonna throw that in there. And this is also a great time to season with some fresh ground black pepper. And a pinch of salt. When you're cooking, you don't want to just season at the end. You want to season along the way, a little bit at a time. And then if you need to make any adjustments at the end, you can. You can always add just a little bit more salt. It's always better to cook a little bit at a time with the salt because that adds layers of flavor to the food rather than just putting all the salt in at the end. I mean, this smells so good. Just the onions and the garlic and the mushrooms, the fresh herbs, the salt, the pepper, everything's just coming together and it smells like Thanksgiving. We ain't even cooking the turkey yet. Okay, once these mushrooms are now fully cooked, we're gonna add some flour and we're gonna start to make a roux with everything in there. So I got my flour, about a couple tablespoons, inside this little metal sieve, and I'm gonna use this to add the flour in, and I like to just do it a little bit at a time so it doesn't get clumpy. So I'll tap in some, I'll mix it in, then when I don't see it anymore, I'll tap in a little bit more, and this is just gonna stop from any big clumps from going in there. And I'm constantly scraping up the bottom of the pan. If it looks a little dry, that's okay. We're gonna add some stock and some heavy cream in a second, so that'll get everything nice and liquid. That seems to be about enough. You know it's a good amount when it starts to look just a little dry and the flour has absorbed all the moisture inside the pan. We're gonna let this flour cook down just to get that raw flour taste out. And I'm constantly scraping up the bottom of the pan to make sure that just none of this burns. You can see how dry everything looks. That's a perfect sign that the flour has absorbed all the moisture and it's gonna do its thing and making this nice and creamy and thick. So now here, a little bit at a time, I'm just gonna add some broth. Here I'm using chicken broth. You can use whatever stock. You could probably use a vegetable stock. If you wanted to make this veggie, you could do that. Here I'm just gonna use this chicken broth. As I'm adding the broth, I'm always scraping up the bottom of the pan to get everything that's on the bottom mixed into the liquid. This is what makes cooking like this super amazing. And this is why that we're not gonna buy the stuff inside the can. Why would we do that when we can make an amazing, cream of mushroom soup or something really similar? Just like this. And now we're gonna add in some heavy cream. You can use half and half, but heavy cream is definitely probably the premier creamer that you can use. And now we're gonna give this a mix until it's all nice and well incorporated. Once this comes up to a simmer, we're gonna let it reduce for a little bit until it gets nice and creamy. And while this is coming up to temp, we're gonna add some Better Than Bouillon chicken paste. This is such a great addition to this dish because it's really gonna amplify that chicken flavor. And again, if you wanna keep it veggie, Better Than Bouillon has a garlic, they got an onion flavor, they got a veggie stock flavor, but this concentrated flavor paste is really gonna make this holiday dish a shine. And remember, this is super concentrated, so a little bit of it goes a long way. Just need maybe tablespoon. That's probably plenty for a big dish like this. Here I'm gonna take out the whisk and I'll use that to make sure everything is nice and well incorporated. And you can already see this is starting to cream up really nicely. You can already see it's a whole lot less runny than it was before, that as I pull it, it leaves like a little valley for just a moment. Now we're gonna add a couple things. So first we're gonna add a sprinkle of my base seasoning. This has garlic powder, onion powder, salt, and pepper in it. We already added a little salt and pepper, so we're not gonna put that much of this, just a little bit. And I'm constantly stirring this and adjusting my heat to make sure that it's not burning. Last but not least, we're gonna give this a coating of some freshly grated Parmesan cheese right over the top. It smells unbelievable. So once your cheese is melted, we're gonna shut the heat off and combine this with our string beans, or green beans. What do you call them? String beans, green beans? I always call them string beans, even though it's called green bean casserole. Is it string bean casserole? It's called string bean casserole. Now let's combine everything before we send it in the oven. So I got my green beans that have been chilled and drained of any liquid. I wanna make sure that they're a little dry. I don't want them soggy in there. So we're gonna throw those inside of our bowl. And now let's take our mushroom cream and toss it right over the top. And I'm really gonna try to clean every single drop out of this pan. This stuff is so good. And now I'm gonna give this a mix to mix it as well as I can before we put this back inside the casserole dish. I was never big on green bean casserole when I first tried it because the version I tried was canned beans, canned mushroom soup, canned crispy onions. I mean, it's okay, but it kind of tastes like holiday junk food. I mean, when you do it like this, it's almost a completely different dish. And not to knock the people that like it like that, but I love home cooking and the energy behind it. So, you know, when you make stuff like that, it can only come out so good. Crap in, crap out. But when you do it like this and you put lots of love and time and attention to it, this is gonna taste so amazing. So now that this is all well mixed, we're gonna put this inside of our casserole dish. So now before this goes in the oven, I'm gonna smooth out the top just to make it nice and flat. So we're gonna sprinkle our crispy fried shallots on top after. This isn't even cooked, this already looks fantastic. This is gonna go in a 375-degree oven. I'm gonna cover it for the first 20 minutes, and after about 20 minutes, I'm gonna take the top off, and we're gonna cook it for about another 5 or 10 minutes until we start to see some browning on top. So I got my high rim saute pan back on the stove. I put my frying oil in there and I'm getting it heated up to about 350. While that's coming up to temperature, we're gonna take our shallots that we pulled all apart and we're gonna add some flour, and again, some of my base seasoning stuff is super useful. We're gonna take a little bit of flour and sprinkle it over the top, just a couple of tablespoons. Any extra is gonna stay inside the bowl. We just want to get just a light coating of flour on the outside of these. And now we're going to sprinkle in a little bit of my base seasoning. This is just making like a quick seasoned flour. And now just by hand, I can take these and just toss them around. And now they're get well coated with the flour. It'll also help break up any of like the individual ones that are still like in like the little concentric rings. So take a second, because once you do that, you can't undo that. So I'm gonna keep mixing these until they're all nice and well coated. Once these are nice and coated with the flour and the seasoning, check our oil. We're right at a little north of 350 degrees on this oil, so this is perfect for frying. Nice big handful at a time. I'm gonna shake these loose of any flour, and we're gonna drop them in there for some fry magic. These are not gonna take a long time. I'll probably do them like 2 handfuls at a time. And I'm trying to like break them up as I'm throwing them in there. Make sure that your oil is not too high, because, oh boy. Because as you drop stuff in the oil, you don't want your oil to spill over onto your burners. And we're just give these a nice little mix around. You should take just a couple of minutes per batch. After about 3 minutes, when these are nice and golden brown, we're gonna use our spider and we're gonna remove them and put them on a plate covered with some paper towel. And I'm gonna try to put them nice and spread out, because as they air dry and they drip from the oil, they'll crisp up even more. Now, before we fry the second batch, we're gonna let our oil come back up to temp. While we're doing that, let's try a couple of these and see what they taste like. That is so good. Okay, oil's back up to temp. Shake off any of the excess flour. Drop them in a little bit at a time. So once these are nice and golden brown, we're gonna remove these. Shut our heat off. I don't deep fry stuff too much, so I'll reuse this oil a couple of times before it gets a toss. So now that our fried onions are done, let's check on our green bean casserole. So our casserole has been in the oven for about 20 minutes at 375. I just turned the convection setting on, and now I'm gonna throw this in there until we get a little browning on the top, but this already looks absolutely amazing. It smells wonderful. So I'm gonna put this in there for about 10 more minutes until we get a little color on the top. Our green bean casserole was in the oven for an extra 10 minutes with the convection setting on, just so we get a nice little like hardening on the top of everything. It also helped to remove some of the moisture, help kind of like condense the casserole a little bit. Now we're gonna take our crispy fried shallots and we're gonna sprinkle these right over the top. And you could put as much or as little as possible, but I wanna make sure that even if you get the corner pieces, you are gonna get some of this crispy goodness. And now, we got a couple extra shallots, but these are just great snackers. You could always take these and put these at a bowl for your guests. Don't worry, they'll eat through these, no problem. Now, how amazing does this green bean casserole look? I am super excited to try it. This looks fantastic. So let's get a nice section of this corner. I mean, this looks so good, and it's still nice and warm. Most of the time when you get Thanksgiving food, it's not that warm. Everybody's been there for a while and dishes have been sitting out in only, 1 or 2 ovens. But I mean, if we take a look at this, the mushroom cream soup, I don't even want to call it a soup. Let's just call it like a mushroom cream, and these crispy fried shallots on top, and the green beans. This looks unbelievable. I am so excited to try this. So let's get a little bit of everything on one bite, and that's not too hard. We got our string beans, we got our cream covered over the string beans, these crispy shallots. This is gonna be an epic bite. If you've never had green bean casserole and you tried this, I feel sorry if you ever try the canned stuff, because this is so good and so yummy and so delicious. I don't even need the turkey. I could just eat this all by itself. This is so good. The layers of flavor in here are unreal. The crispy shallots, the savoriness from the mushrooms. I mean, mushrooms are some of the most umami things ever, and they're like the meat of like the plant world, even though they're not really plants, they're their own thing. But this is so good. Wow. I know this is traditionally like a Thanksgiving dish, but you could eat this all by itself on a Tuesday night, and this is a winner string bean dinner, green bean or whatever we call it. I hope you like this recipe video. I'm gonna finish the rest of my green bean casserole. If you like holiday side dishes, especially Thanksgiving one, check out my sausage and rice stuffing. My mom's been making that one for years. I love it. See you there. Thanks.